Without further ado, let's discover the notion of namespace. As I briefly explained in the introduction video, the namespace is a new notion that will allow to group together symbols and functions, having a semantic relation in the same set. This set, this bag, will be the namespace. Until now, we could only make this kind of semantic link by grouping together our symbols and functions in the same file. For instance, that's what you used to do in C. You have, say, a file that would interact with lists, and you described all of your terms interacting with lists inside that same file. But very quickly, when the processes become complex, the file tends to become very large. We'd find ourselves with a lot of symbols, a lot of functions, and it might not be practical to work with large files. We want to split them into small files and still have these different symbols together, but not just in a compilation unit, meaning a file. We want another larger notion that could be extended to many files and given a name. That's exactly what the notion of namespace is all about. Let's discover together a little bit of C++ syntax with this simple notion of namespace. For starters, I invite you to have a look at these two lines. We have the declaration of a global variable of integer type initialized with the value of 1, and the definition of a f function returning an integer, not accepting parameters, and returning the constant 2. It's not very interesting. Here, the only goal is to have a variable and a function. We can imagine having multiple cases with functions and variables with similar names, and we want to pack them up, throwing them in a bag that would allow to have easier semantics. The syntax would be as follows. We are going to introduce this new namespace keyword, followed by the name of the namespace we want to introduce. This defines a new scope that will be between the two curling braces here and there. Everything we put between these curling braces will be part of this namespace. It means that we create a subscope, a new bag, a new semantic relation, for all the symbols we throw in. This is very interesting because we'll be able to have within namespaces named differently, symbols having the same name. As you can see here, gl_var and f are defined as foo and bar namespaces. We will see when compiling that there's no conflict with the gl_var and the f brackets found in the global scope. We agree that with the standard C file, if I had written a second variable named gl_var, I would have got a compilation error because gl_var would have already been defined. Here, thanks to the notion of namespace, I can avoid this issue and group symbols I consider semantically related. The example is quite simple here. It's just to show you the syntax. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. By the way, here's a very practical little notion. It's called namespace aliasing. We'll define a new namespace as equivalent to other namespace. You'll realize that if I may put whatever I want in a namespace, I may throw in another namespace, for example. So we'll have this notion of imbricated namespaces. This can result in quite long names to get the symbol you are interested in. And sometimes it can be interesting to have at the top of the file an alias for a long namespace with a shorter name to be able to keep a shorter and more expressive syntax. To do that, just define a new namespace using the namespace keyword, followed by the alias you want to give, followed by quotes equals and the name of the namespace you wish to use. In my example, the muff namespace will be perfectly equivalent to the bar namespace. I also wrote underneath a little test main, brackets, so we can test all this and make sure everything works fine. The first pair of lines will just display the values, and call the f function and the gl_var global variable that was in the global scope defined at the very top. We should see the value 1, then the value 2. Then we can see I use gl_var and f brackets that were in the foo namespace. It's time to introduce a new operator that's completely new, and is called the scope resolution operator. If you remember my PHP videos, I already introduced this operator. And in an Indian language, I'm not sure which one it is. Its name is just impossible to pronounce and has about 20 characters. So if you want to have fun, go check the name of this operator on Google. It's always a lot of fun. Anyways, I'll call it the scope resolution operator. It's longer, but still a lot simpler. We can see here that this operator will allow me to make this call in the foo namespace. I want to access the gl_var variable. Inside the foo namespace, I want to access the f brackets function. It's very simple. From there, this expression will allow me to output the value of the gl_var experience inside the foo namespace. Here we can see, as a reminder, that I write in this string the full expression so we can know what we're referring to. So here I'll output the content of the foo namespace. Underneath, no surprise, it's the same, but with the bar namespace. So we can see again the gl_var and the f brackets don't conflict in terms of names because bar and foo are different namespaces. Here, in the same way, I'm calling the muff namespace. We saw that the muff namespace was just an alias for the bar namespace. So if everything goes well, I should have the exact same output for these two lines, and for these two, based on the name of the namespace. Then I added a little syntactic particularity for your knowledge, using directly the syntax of a variable or a global function. Might be a little bit cumbersome sometimes, in case we're using many namespaces. And for better readability, we tend to use a syntax empty namespace, scope resolution, and the global symbol. This syntax and this one are the exact same. You can play with this and use the one you like the most. I think there aren't actually rules to follow. Just make sure it's clear. If calling a global variable directly by its ID seems better for you, then do it. If in the context it might be better to add quotes : quotes in front, then do it too. Don't put these colons in front of normal functions because it's quite overkill, whereas a simple call to the function is more than enough. Now let's see this compilation. It's compiling. Everything's fine. Let's run it. We can see that, as we thought, it's outputting the value of the global variable and the call to the f bracket function that was also defined in the global scope 1 and 2. As for the foo namespace, we can see that we also have the relevant values 3 and 4. Just to be sure, here we had 3 and 4. Then for the bar namespace, we had the values 5 and 6. Everything works fine, and here we can see that our alias worked. Muff namespace to bar namespace, with again the values 5 and 6. And again, as we thought, I was telling you that the scope resolution operator with no namespace in front refers to the global scope, and again we have the values 1 and 2 that were right here. So namespaces are something you'll be using quite often. Sometimes you will describe them yourself. You will realize that there is one namespace in particular that you will use a lot. It's the standard namespace, quotes, std::, in which you can find the whole standard C++ library. You will quickly become familiar with this syntax, and we'll see that it's not complicated at all. I will see you in a moment in the next video.